Hello, and welcome to Female Forces, a podcast dedicated to highlighting influential women throughout literature. Kicking off this podcast is a series focusing on female writers and early American literature. During a time when women held fewer rights, these authors were inserting themselves in the narrative and navigating their positions within the world. Many of them found clever ways to talk about problematic issues regarding colonization, race, gender, religion, you name it. Women were writing during this time period. And although many of these female authors are less well known, trust me, they are worth knowing. So, thank you for listening and joining me for this episode of Female Forces. We have a really special and important episode planned for today. Today, we'll be learning about Phillis Wheatley. Now, here's a quick biography about her. And I'd like to give a quick shout out to the National Women's History Museum and Dr. Bryce Peterson for providing me with a lot of this background information. Phillis Wheatley is widely recognized as the first African American poet and the third American female poet overall. She was born around 1753 in Gambia, Africa, and was wrongfully captured and enslaved at the young age of 8. After being taken to America and sold to the Wheatley family, she was given the first name of Phillis from the ship that brought her to America. So, tragically, we don't know her true first name that was given to her at birth. Additionally, the last name Wheatley belonged to her owners and was projected onto her. While being enslaved by the Wheatley family, Phillis Wheatley learned how to read the Bible, Greek and Latin classics, as well as British literature. She was extremely well-read. She started to write poetry as a young teenager and published her first poem in 1767. In 1773, she became the first enslaved Black woman in America to publish a book. Her book included a foreword signed by John Hancock and other white men at the time, who all felt the need to justify her writing and prove that it was truly written by a Black woman, which is so racist and problematic. Shortly after publishing her book, Wheatley was emancipated. Later, she married John Peters, a free Black man, and together they had 3 children who quickly passed away. She worked as a maid to support her family while she continued to write and eventually died in 1784. That's quite the bio and quite a lot to break down, but overall, Phillis Wheatley's positionality and intersectionality as an author, poet, female, person of color, and young teenager, for a majority of her writing anyway, provides readers with an amazing opportunity to learn about the horrific and awful nature of enslavement, the experiences of an enslaved woman and a person of color, as well as the state of America during the American Revolution. And Phillis Wheatley writes about all of this in the form of poems and letters. For today's podcast, I'll be choosing a section from one of Phillis Wheatley's poems to read and later talk about and analyze. Now, one of Wheatley's most famous poems is titled On Being Brought from Africa to America. This poem seems to express gratitude for being brought to America and being converted to Christianity. However, when diving beneath the surface, many scholars believe that Wheatley sends subtle messages through her punctuation that completely flip this narrative, suggesting that Christians need refining and that white people should repent from viewing Black people with, quote, a scornful eye, end quote. I struggle as a reader to interpret poetry deeply, so some of these subtle messages and commentaries are easy for me to miss. That's why I appreciate another one of Wheatley's poems, which is a little bit more explicit in her views. This poem is addressed to the Right Honorable William, Earl of Dartmouth, His Majesty's Principal Secretary of State for North America and Company. Just based on that title alone, it's cool to witness that Phillis Wheatley was making a difference by writing to people with power and influence. And what she shares in the poem that follows sheds light on some troubling aspects of enslaved life. I'll share a portion of that poem with you. Wheatley writes, No more, America, in mournful strain of wrongs and grievance unredressed complain. No longer shalt thou dread the iron chain, which wanton tyranny with lawless hand hath made, and with it meant to enslave the land. Should you, my lord, while you peruse my song, wonder from whence my love of freedom sprung, whence flow these wishes for the common good, by feeling hearts alone best understood, I, young in life, by seemingly cruel fate, was snatched from Afric's fancied happy seat. What pangs excruciating must molest, what sorrows labor in my parents' breast. Steeled was that soul, and by no misery moved, that from a father seized his babe beloved. Such my case, and can I then but pray others may never feel tyrannic sway? These two stanzas of poetry, Wheatley highlights the current colonial struggle of fighting for freedom from Great Britain. In praying and hoping that America should, quote, no longer dread the iron chain, end quote, and fierce tyranny from its mother country, Wheatley clearly expresses her support for the American Revolution and its coordinating principles of liberty and freedom. However, by placing the following stanza in its position, right after talking about the chains and tyranny facing the colonies, she uses juxtaposition to compare America's state to her own, wrongfully enslaved state. She uses this subtle juxtaposition, but she also goes a step beyond that by explicitly explaining where she got her desire for freedom. She speaks directly to the recipient of the poem, presumably a powerful white man, and says, quote, should you, my lord, while you peruse my song, wonder from whence my love of freedom sprung, whence flow these wishes for the common good, by feeling hearts alone best understood, end quote. Essentially, she's saying, in case you're wondering why I'm so passionate about America's freedom, I'm just going to share my story for you to hear. And let's take a moment to look closely at her emotional story. Rather than labeling it mercy that brought her to America, like she does in her poem on being brought from Africa to America, Wheatley now labels the experience as a cruel fate. There is no shield or sarcasm hiding that comment. Wheatley is calling it out as it is. Adding pathos to her argument, Wheatley then talks about her parents in such an emotional and tragic way. She talks about life in Africa being happy and contrasts that with her parents' excruciating pains and sorrows laboring in their breasts. The reactions from her parents are so real and heartbreaking, and Phillis Wheatley uses such vivid words to describe them. The word choice is exceptionally important. Once again, Wheatley decides to place her message out in the open. She explicitly labels her coming to America as being stolen. In a final effort to instill sympathy and understanding in the reader, Wheatley brings up her father once again and paints a vivid picture. She writes, quote, from a father seized his babe beloved, such my case, and can I then but pray others may never feel tyrannic sway? This last question that she poses could swing two different directions. Either Phillis is genuinely questioning whether she can pray that others never experience tyrannic power, because those whom she would be praying for are hypocritically placing her under tyrannic power and enslavement. Or she feels sympathy for America's situation and is asking, can I help but to pray others may never feel this same way? She has sympathy for the American people, and despite all of the awful things that white people have done for her, she manages to ask for their freedom. She uses her language to appeal to people in positions of authority. She is a true female force to be reckoned with. The National Women's History Museum writes that, quote, although she supported the American Revolution, she believed that slavery was the issue that prevented the colonists from achieving true heroism. She wrote several letters to ministers and others on liberty and freedom. During the peak of her writing career, she wrote a well-received poem praising the appointment of George Washington as the commander of the Continental Army, end quote. Reading Phillis Wheatley's poetry and letters allows for readers like you and me to consider her position and look into the experiences of a Black enslaved and young woman. This plays an important role in our education. in learning about the harmful history of the United States and racism. Additionally, as we read female stories and narratives, it's crucial that we include diverse representation in that literature. Phillis Wheatley and other amazing women of color have paved the way for more authors and writers to share their stories. I recently read a beautiful book of poetry titled Brown Girl Dreaming, written by another female author of color, Jacqueline Woodson. Her memoir, written in free verse, touches on similar issues regarding race and childhood. Reading her story opened my mind and increased my empathy. I'm still learning. But I hope that as I continue reading and seeking out books that are from different perspectives than my own, I can gain increased empathy. I'd like to invite you in that same challenge. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Female Forces.